Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the FinTech Decoded podcast with me, Musheer Ahmed, and your co-host.
Monica Jasuja.
Yes. Hey, we always have to have a little bit of a start, and we're still figuring out the best way to bounce off each other. With us is a very dear friend whom I met here in Hong Kong, and he was very kind to me when I first met with him. I think it's about 2017 in a space called Meta, and he is truly one of the thought leaders and an industry expert on digital finance. And we'll be also touching about something very interesting with his latest book. So please give a big welcome to our guest, Paolo Sironi, who is with IBM. And welcome, Paolo. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, and I do remember well our first meeting, the nice place, the good conversation, and the bad coffee.
Yes. Yeah, it's called the California Tower, and the space was called Meta. We were reminiscing yesterday to some of us, which is, for those who don't know, Meta was a big influence on the Hong Kong startup ecosystem over the last 10 years. It's no longer, the space no longer exists, but Lan Pai Fung Group and Nest VC had opened it up for entrepreneurs and for people in tech, and it was a lovely space for us to collaborate on for 4 5 years. But this is about Paolo and his story, and we'll take a deep dive on various topics. But Paolo, what's been happening? It's been a few years. We hope to see you in Hong Kong this year for FinTech Week. But beyond that, would love to hear what has been keeping you busy over the last 3 to 4 years.
Guess what? Technology that keeps everybody busy, in particular artificial intelligence, but also beyond that. If you remember, I started my professional journey in risk management as a quantitative head of risk. Then I built a small startup. Startups are all very small in Germany in 2008 that IBM bought in 2013. And when I joined IBM, I started also my literary journey, publishing books on different topics around financial services. And then I started leading the business research within the IBM Institute for Business Value about banking and financial markets, which I lead worldwide. And my research on the personal side and on the IBM side started converging and intertwining. And so that gave me a lot of opportunity to, if you like, investigate, but also synthesize for better understanding, to connect the dots. At some point, I also delved into economic theory. I thought we needed a different theory to transform financial services that became the theory and principle of financial market transparency that I published of Davos in World Economic Forum 2019. Essentially, the many bankers and fintech entrepreneurs attempted to transform financial services like you want to change the production of electricity from a carbon plant to a nuclear plant. I guess those guys want a different theory to do so, but bankers and fintech entrepreneurs pretend to do that on a previous theory. So I thought that setting the real foundations was necessary. And actually, as you're in Hong Kong, that was not just launched during Davos. It was pre-launched 1 week before in Hangzhou, as I was invited to present it at the Westlake Cultural Forum. I remember I had 45,000 people live on the WeChat streaming, and I was totally flabbergasted. And the organizer said, Paolo, typically 100,000. So it was just half the quota that they usually expect. But for me, a great success, and was economic theory. And the reason is because that spells a story around platforms in financial services that intersect with economic development. And platforms are everywhere, so platform thinking is essential. There I started shaping the fifth book, Amazon bestseller in banking and financial markets, Banks and FinTech on Platform Economies, that talks about conscious banking. And so you see, I started laying the foundations of this new book, Quantum Sapiens. Essentially, to conclude, there I identified that the money for value in financial services is the intensification of financial consciousness of the individuals. And through transparency-led regulation and consequential aesthetics, the increase in the financial consciousness of the ecosystem. So then, having set the ground for that, I learned that all of these had a parallel investigation in neurobiology and in philosophy. And so I decided back in 2020 when I finished writing my Banks and FinTech on Platform Economies to start writing Quantum Sapiens. It took me a long time, 5 years and a half, reading, researching, writing, changing, deleting, redoing, and so excited that the new book was released last week, actually, a few days ago. And it is a literary novel this time, so a different format, but as a wrapper of a much deeper scientific and philosophical conversation of what it means to be human in the age of AI.
That's a handful, right? It's thank you so much for sharing your journey, and it's a remarkable journey in terms of all the books and all the transition. And it is there for people when they get acquired, acqui-hired in some senses to stay the course. So it's great to see, and to IBM's benefit too, and a lot of us benefit as well.
Yes, IBM has been a great platform to learn about the world and to give back, first of all, to clients and colleagues, and then to the general public. And my research at the IBM Institute for Business Value also has a lot of legs. It enables me to dive into the real momentum to get the pulse of what really happens in the ecosystem made of banks and fintech companies. And it's actually interesting because when I shaped, for example, my bank innovation quadrant, that spells a view on how technology will influence the transformation of the business models. I knew that would be sound, but seeing in action, research after research, step after step, is truly entertaining. And so I can combine this way a very long-term perspective, which is typically found in my personal literature, where I really set the theoretical foundations, which are very practical because it inspires design to move forward. And the IBM research, which is still strategic, but more about the moment or the next few years. And then see, how the two, if you like, enrich the one the other. And for me, it has been an extraordinary space for learning, and hopefully I'm giving back a bit to all the friends that will want to read my work.
I would love to ask one question, Paolo, where you mentioned that you were live streaming and you were talking about the platformization. In all the years that you have been now observing the space and seeing how it develops, like what is your view? Were you expecting this kind of platformization to happen, especially locally, as much as it is happening regionally, perhaps also, but I'm not sure about the global impact. And if you could also speak to that.
Yeah, let me say that I've been working internationally ever since, but particularly in China since 1999. And my first assignment was through the World Bank to teach credit risk management to the board of the Bank of Nanjing. I think at the time it was called the City Commercial Bank of Nanjing. They changed the name. And so that doesn't mean I know China, but I know enough, put it this way, okay? So I've been coming and going for many years. And there's a difference in the way people shape the conversation, that side of the world and this side of the world. In China, the platform discussion is more upfront. Even at the Westlake Cultural Forum, the question I was posed is, how do the Chinese operate their social and economic platform, okay? Thinking about a new definition of value. So they were entertained by the fact that I spelled this axiology in financial services, so they wanted to learn. In the Western world, we have great examples of platform economy, but it feels like the entrepreneurs stumbled on it sort of by chance. They really did not design it and define it consciously. And those that were more successful, I guess, were those that were more flexible to adapt. For example, Mark Zuckerberg, if you remember the way he described Facebook in the first interview he ever gave on television, he said that Facebook was a place where people could share the results of their exams with friends. I don't know anybody who would have cared about sharing the result of their exam in law or in mathematics with friends. But then he was adaptive, was capable of pivoting when he realized that people were using that differently, and that started creating positive network effects. So the problem we're facing today is that regulation should be reconsidered in the light of transparency to facilitate the transformation in a way that starts within the system. So regulation cannot be prescriptive, but at the same time cannot be passive as well. So you cannot just make change from the top, and you cannot expect that from the bottom it rises up. So you need to make sure that you identify which are the consequentialist elements, consequentialist ethical elements that allow the movement to start and to spread. Okay, so that's why platform theory is important. So here and there, I'm capturing more conversation. For example, I was invited in the outside of the European Commission, some of the director generals a couple of times to discuss all my literature. So it's interesting also to see how policymakers want to discuss this, but still, I feel like we're all trapped into a very linear way of thinking. Now, there's no success that generates real value for client out of a platform economy perspective in financial services, as institutions and also fintech has to box out from their existing way of doing the business. Great and interesting feedback I got from Nubank, for example, is on my LinkedIn about commercial banking on the discussions we had. They are the transparent bank, right? The naked bank. So I see that some of the friends that engage with me in conversations enjoyed and leveraged some of these ideas and many more. It takes time, but the banking innovation quadrant, which is at the heart of the banks and fintech and platform economies, is robust. And even today, where we talk about agentic AI and generative AI, that did not really exist in this language in 2019, 2020, when I wrote it, you can easily see it popping up on the banking innovation quadrant, which is made of information, which is like a tokenization, if you like, and the communication quotient, which is generative AI, and agenting is supposed to bring them, in unity, because it's supposed to operate on clear data, making relationship more autonomous in the decision-making process. So I think that all of this is extremely powerful, and no surprise it was banking bestseller in and out on Amazon for a few years.
That is amazing to hear.
I'm just building on that, Paolo, and you brought up China, right? And in some senses, when you think of platform economy, and the WeChat versus Alipay started with different origins, went through that super app conversation. We didn't quite see this translate so much in Europe or in the US, right? But it did translate well in other parts of Asia, like in Japan with Kakao and Line. I mean, in Korea, in Thailand, in Southeast Asia with Grab and Gojek, and to a certain extent in India with Paytm and a couple of others. Kareem replicated that in UAE. So emerging markets in Asia, even the developed markets, seem to have kind of worked. What would you say is kind of the reason this didn't take off or didn't happen in the US? Although even Elon Musk's ultimate vision for X is to make it the WeChat of the West, right? So we love your thoughts.
True. I said my banks and fintech and platform economist to Elon Musk a few years back when he said that. I know he received it. I don't know if you read it. I guess he didn't. But I made my attempt to inspire differently. There are a few reasons for this. I used to say that the world is divided into three areas without offending anybody. The US, when technology is born and Chinese are becoming extremely competitive, Europe, where regulation is born for the good and also for the bad, and Asia Pacific, in particular, China and India, where the business model is born, right? But in the end, you cannot just export the data anywhere because it depends on the maturity of technology as well as the regulation. And so it's a mix of these things that you need to consider. In places like China, for example, there were no banking habits that were creating gravity like in the Western world, where there is still a unbanked or probably the banking population, so they will need it, but the habits are the habits. Just think about the fact that 20% of payments across the small and medium enterprises in the US are still made by checks. Okay, so miles away from the digital experience 100% or the platform economy that was triggered by the champions of the Chinese ecosystem. So the habits are first. The second is simplicity. When you build your revenues around complexity of products as a marketing mechanism, your infrastructure is loaded with a lot of things, right? When instead starts green and you just look for, the easy strikes, and those that matter when you have scale possibly in front of you, that's basically easier to perform, right? So because you start from fresh, so people on board more easily. And therefore is also regulation at this point, which is a pros and a cons. On the one side, I tried to facilitate a better relationship between banks and clients. At the same time, was also entrenched into the banking incentives, if you like, so they don't know how to detach from the need to make sure that banks are also stable, right, and resilient. And that's the reason why I also worked at the level of economic and financial market theory to allow everyone to reposition the regulators, the banks, and the consumers, learning a bit more about themselves and smoothing these asperities and these constraints that otherwise in the Western world keep on dragging down the potential impact of innovation. Last but not least, you need to have scale. So I was talking to the new friends and they say like they've been 50% very good, but also 50% lucky because they had a market of 200 plus million consumers. They had peaks from the central bank. Instant payments were the first to adopt a scale. And there was the pandemic, unfortunately, right, which accelerated digital habits. In many other countries, you don't have that scale, which China has, for example, right? Uber scale, more than that. So how can you expect that, I don't know, an institution in Austria, in Switzerland, or in France makes the same where their market of reference is confined to a much smaller population? There you see, for example, the difficulty of Revolut to move beyond the borders, because there are still borders even in Europe, right? And maybe the strategy is a bit too confused for me, but it would be a different story. But that is the reason why you see this difference. Now, that doesn't mean that East is good, West is bad, because there's still a lot of improper realizations of the platform economy in the East as well, because the value is not set the right way. It's very transactional, which can also create damage in terms of the final consumption of financial services. You can see cases of buy now, pay later, for example, not well thought through. So ultimately, concluding this, I always try to define what is the real value that we want to achieve as a fintech ecosystem. And to me, the value is increasing the financial consciousness of people for them to know how to pull financial services from digital, and through consequentially ethics that regulations can guide through when inspired, increase the financial consciousness of the whole ecosystem. So then you see the stretch into the real consciousness piece was just like an easy step, though heavy, deep, and a great fatigue, but it is there.
Paolo, I want to comment on this, but this whole East versus West divide is actually becoming bigger. And I just feel that this is not just across payments, buy now, pay later, and everything else that we are moving at and thinking about. It's just that in the last couple of years, the East has just possibly looked at a growth curve which is very different than the West. And what is happening is that the models that the global product giants used to produce are no longer something that just work off the shelf in the East. And thereby, I don't like the debate of East versus West, but I just feel that right now, with everything that's happening, the word used to be globalization, then it became localization, now it's localization. But at the end of the day, it's about being able to cater to the needs of most. And I love how you articulated this, because increasing the financial consciousness of users is really what we need. Everybody talks about access, but I think access without enablement means nothing.
I
And
agree with you. It can be very damaging. So you need to compensate that, right? It's
exactly.
welcome. Convenience is super important, but
Yes,
that's just a piece.
exactly. And I think we missed the puzzle pieces a little bit, but I'm so glad to hear this, because it's one of those common subjects that a lot of us agree on, but it looks like the literature is just helping us disagree on it most of the
Yeah,
time.
you see, Monica, I travel a lot. The world is global, but it's also very local. And we need to understand and respect that. And then things go in waves. What I care about is that humanity is global. So I wanted to identify those elements of human value which are eternal and apply anywhere you are in this globe. Then people's life is local. And local is very different in terms of habits, regulation, perspectives, and so on and so forth. And it's crafting that equilibrium that is relevant even in the implementation of technology when it goes cross-border and so on and so forth. So we would love everything to be so seamless and identical. Not always it is possible. It is a process of convergence. I'm optimist. I believe that sooner or later, one way or the other, right, that these things tend to go in a more reconciled direction because there's value for everybody. It's just that it always takes much longer than expected. Still, we need to craft that perspective in a theoretical, grounded view of what the system should look like even before we start implementing, because when the first principles are the same, integration gets easier. If the first principles are different, we tend to move in very different directions, and then it becomes more complicated.
I was gonna
100%
say,
agree.
sorry, I was just going to follow up and a very quick one. And before we maybe start talking a little bit more of the big tech side of things, you mentioned Nubank and Brazil, right? And now when we think about real-time payments, in reality, you have UPI as this massive giant, the largest in the world at one stage, 30-40% of the world's real-time payments was running through UPI. When it comes to WeChat Pay and Alipay, it's more a private network than a digital public infrastructure. But now in Brazil, you have this massive flow that's coming through Pix. How do you see and you compare them? Are you seeing them as similar? And Nubank dominates so much, but how are you seeing that play out on the Brazil versus the India UPI story?
Well, they are technically very different, and maybe they also map different needs, right, of the different economies and also different political capabilities. So we need to understand that. But I think that they have the same thing in common. As a narrative, they started like an inclusion opportunity, or the opportunity to allow people with little money to share that little value they have without losing it through transactions and making it a bit more secure compared to what they were doing before. But then in the end, it turned out a cross-segment opportunity. I never really believed about the things that work for the poor don't work for the rich, vice versa. The segmentation makes no sense. When something is good, go across society. And here it is proven that the systems in China, in India, and in Brazil are used from everybody, right? So it is cross. And I say this because one of the first segments in the fintech ecosystem I started looking at more closely was the wealth management piece. And I was always entertained by the false perspective of people trying to engage the millennials as if they were aliens on this planet whose biology was different from everybody else. And I remember a conversation with Betterment about this. And I'm saying here, that is the reason why when I started researching deeper and then I published my financial market transparency, I looked at and I said consciously and deliberately the biological micro foundations of financial services, which go well deeper than the mere representation of psychological traits or surface-like habits that we can observe. Looking at what people do or basically checking, getting feedback from the platforms. Because the essence of financial services, which are the biological macro foundations, is facing fundamental uncertainty. It doesn't matter how old you are, over irreversible time. That's where maybe there is a little difference between the old and the young. And irreversible time and fundamental uncertainty are also at the core of this a book on consciousness called Quantum Sapiens, which tries to reposition these ideas exactly where they were found, the biology of the human being. So that I find very powerful because it goes beyond any, if you like, noise that you can hear around any little survey about segmentation and don't make much sense and keeps on being beaten by reality. So that's what it is about. This is good and true for everyone, old, young, tall, small, men, women, whatever you are. So that's powerful.
And aliens as well, maybe.
Well, possibly so.
You won't go into the debate on extraterrestrials just yet, but eventually somebody has to think space, right?
I'm very scared because if Elon Musk fancies the aliens, really, IBM will send me, to discuss mainframe there, and that's like years of travel. Okay, so
because one of the things that I'm quite if you get a chance to write something or write a book on would be on writing on payments in space and the space economy, as it were. Maybe something for us to collaborate on for the next
well,
year.
something you like to learn, and is that in the quantum reality, the present, the instant, is eternal. So there's no better space than an entangled space for truly instant payments.
Voila. Takes me back to my engineering days with all the quantum physics. And, it always has been a fascinating piece to stay in mind. A lot of people think of physics as, Newton's law and everything else, but quantum physics is definitely super interesting.
Well, actually in this Quantum Sapiens, and I'm learning from giants. Okay, so it's not my producer. I'm a connector of the dots. There's an explanation of how you can reconcile space-time with quantum gravity, which just on the surface seem contradicting the one the other. But the fact is that space-time is how we experience reality. Time is an epistemological criteria to understand reality, but time does not exist in quantum gravity. So the question is, how do you bring them all together? And that's where I thought literature, poetry, to its highest form, is what is needed to, in a sense, deceive your illusions in order to inspire your intellect to reconcile these two perspectives. And I hope that by reading Quantum Sapiens, you will get there and grasp what I'm talking about. It's truly thought-provoking, revolutionary, and tries to reaffirm the centrality of the human values, not as something which is against, for example, the planet, because we are part of that, right? So it's an holistic perspective. So the human values are also the value of respecting the planet, right? The place we live in. So it's discussing its broader and deeper perspective once and for all.
Got it. Monica, anything you would like to add or follow up, and we can take this forward?
No, I'm just very curious to listen in.
So maybe Paolo, just building on top of that, right? And you've told us in some senses the origins of how you got into wanting to write about quantum sapiens, right? I think Monica's just dropped out, but while we consider that, would love to see you. I know before we started, you held up your book, so our audience can get a glimpse of the book, and would love to know when you decided that yes, this is a topic that requires a book, and to go down that path. I love the cover. Yeah.
Well, it is a step of the process and the journey, because it's never the apex, right? Because there's always more to learn. Of more than 20, 25 years of research, it's just the first 20 were applied to financial services. And I have these 5 books out there, from quantitative finance, regulation, the fintech ecosystem, the platform economy, and economics and financial market theory. But as I said, when I shaped the biological macro foundations to define the axiology in financial services into the irreversibility of time and fundamental uncertainty, I realized that that was the pillar. They were the pillar of much more than that. So then I thought, okay, now I want to go back to what I always wanted to do, that is being an author of novels. When I was much younger, I tried to do my little stories and poetry, and I was very bad. So I felt very constrained. And so I said, okay, but this one now, when I want to do the next step, must be literature. Okay, so literary fiction. Because I wanted to build a space where we were not required to go deep into the mathematical demonstrations of things, but start a conversation with the many about what mattered the most. Okay, so having everyone engaged in the capability to feel and to sense the deeper concepts that could be then further studied and investigated after reading this book. The stretch was on the one side not so large or taught because, as I said, this has been financial services is a wonderful space for investigation of consciousness because financial services is fundamental certainty over time, right? And this seems to be key determinant in the intensity of consciousness. But at the same time was a big jump because writing business books and writing literature is very different. So I had to do many things and learn things and it was a complex process in and out. I have here I don't know how many copies of the book written, changed them, modified them. And at the same time, I'm a bit logical. So even though this dives into a bit of science fiction, essentially this visionary scientist replicates his consciousness to reach immortality, which is not something you can see today in our reality. Still, I wanted the old story to be connected in a more logical way. See if you understand what I'm trying to say, not just like artifacts, right, dropped on the page with the black ink. And that took me a long time as well to make sure that all the pieces were coming together. So I was writing, then coming back, and then expanding, and then modifying. It took a long time, 5 years and a half, I have to say. And so for me, was a journey, an introspective journey. So I believe I learned a lot. I put it out there with a sense of intimacy, if you like, right? Because being a personal journey there's a lot of myself inside, and I tried to convey it I tried to be respectful at the same time. At the very end, I unveil a bit more what is my take into this story, but I want to let the readers to build up their perspective themselves, right? So I didn't want to have the good and the bad guys because life is as such, there's a thin line between good and bad. So I decided at some point to mix up the discussion and the discourse where the most controversial figures and characters deliver very relevant content. And sometimes the good characters behave in ways which are not expected from their ethical perspective. So in a way that you are free to position, right? And then I try to, pull the strings, I own the thread, and take you to the very end, which is the last chapter titled Poetry and the Eternal Now.
Paolo, I'm very interested in the whole consciousness question simply because when we hear about consciousness as humans, right, we are thinking about the human realm and also the physical reality for the most part. And for anybody who's spiritual, you tend to think beyond it. For what the book is all about, what does consciousness really mean? And when you talked about your 5.5-year journey, right, like how did you maintain that line of thought? Because there's so much happening around the world. I'm just trying to think of how that did not mar the thinking about consciousness and the debate around what we are seeing with science and tech now.
Well, let's say that I try to bring to the surface the importance of everything that cannot be measured, that in this age of enlightenment gets disregarded, reason why the optimization typically collapses also in financial markets, right, in quantitative finance, but also in building algorithms, which are nothing but complex optimization mechanisms, right? So consciousness belongs largely to the unmeasurable pieces of our life. At least our personal life, then it could be, I let to others to discuss whether it's present anywhere else, right? So at least I pick our view, but I open up for a more holistic way as in the story, consciousness is waved into the universe as well. So I try to make that bridge without becoming esoteric or too spiritual, right? I just want to be more grounded as a way to reflect upon yourself, not much about what can be and cannot be, totally discussed. At least, it stays closer to you. When we talk about this, we also talk about can artificial intelligence be conscious, right? Because is it talking to you? So you feel like you're talking to a conscious being sometimes. And there's the trick. Hallucination is not when AI says something right or something wrong. The real and the first level of hallucination is when AI pretends you to believe it knows something while it knows nothing at all. It can be very powerful, don't misunderstand me, but we need to start with a deep understanding of what that language used by AI really is. And so you get into this point where, is an ontological perspective, the thing that you know, really, your meaning is very private. And then you use language to convey that information out of yourself, but it's like the huge divide between you and the rest of reality to the people. For example, there is this piece in the book where one of the characters says, what if your beloved says, I love you? Do you know how much, or even if? You can't know. The Italians might sing opera trying to convey the message more, but I can say, I love this book, or I love my wife. The language is the same, but the meaning becomes very different. Of course, it's about context, but still, I don't know if that love that I express or I hear is true or not. So this is the point. The meaning is the real landscape. The language is just a set of symbols like a Google map. They can be very entertaining. The Google map is better than the previous printed map, but still is a map. You're not living that landscape. So consciousness is the landscape. Language is the map. And confusing the two is, generating a lot of confusion and problems in the debate about the autonomy or responsibility or determinacy of AI agents and so on and so forth, right? But all we see is performance, a wonderful make-believe. So AI, as powerful as it is, uses the map, cannot access the landscape, but it's a wonderful Alice's mirror. It's an opportunity to look at that and reflect at ourselves on how we communicate ourselves among humans or with other species, right? To rediscover what really, really matters. And if I can say, in the end, I just unveiled that last title, the chapter title, Poetry and the Eternal Now, because poetry is the pinnacle of language. And you know what happened? Some geeks use poetry to circumvent the guardrails of ChatGPT because ChatGPT could not understand the poetic prompt because ChatGPT has no meaning, but poetry is rich of meaning. So he managed to, elude ChatGPT, elude, deceive ChatGPT, okay, using poetry. So then I'm trying to weave all of this together in a way that it makes some sense. I guess that the head of AI guardrails of Anthropic, of OpenAI, I remember, apparently left the company to do poetry in his life. So I don't know, I just read the news. I found that entertaining, given what I was already writing. But that is what it is, right? So I try to set the ground to let you understand the real difference among the things, right? And then the definition becomes very difficult. But I tell you this, the old debate about the new Ferrari, right? Which is actually a nice car, the Luce. If it was a Tesla, it would have been the best Tesla ever. The fact is that if you ask me what the Ferrari is, I can't really define it, but when I see one, I know what it is. Okay? So I want you to know what it is. You don't have to define it. There could be different nuances that we're not yet aware of, given our capability to understand. But that you need to understand, okay? You know what it is when you see one, and AI is not.
That's fascinating. This also brings in that conversation that a lot of people have about AI might be like a 6-year-old child, but it does not have that inherent instinct that humans and animals have, right? Like how, let's take mammals, if it's a deer having a fowl who's just been born, the fowl is immediately walking, right? It immediately knows what to eat. It's eating grass, it's drinking water. There's nothing that consciously has been communicated. It's more, through the DNA and everything that's been built up over millions of years, right?
It's called driveness, okay? And I discussed it. So what I do in this book is also I let the character talk and explain the conditions upon which something can happen. So if you want to replicate consciousness, what would you really have to solve? And I spell it clearly. Then you will see yourself if existing research or declarations are going in that direction or not, right? So I give you the way to decode that through the noise. Okay, so you don't get deceived there. And that is the powerful piece in this book. So it takes different theories, layer upon layer, right? And puts it in front of you in easy ways so that you can build like a puzzle your full perspective. So it was a challenge. Okay, it was a lot of effort. I said 5 years, it's a long time. Just because of that, I wanted to try it. I made my, it's like a startup. A book is a project, right? It's a journey. It's not a destination. And in my hope and more conversations, right, and reflections, there may be more that I have to learn and say after this one. Nothing is ever perfect. But in my epistemological journey, this was an important step forward.
And
talking about that, so there was another piece which I was inspired by Federico Fagin, who is the inventor of the microchip. If you know, the first microchip has his signature, and he has a foundation of consciousness. He's a bit more spiritual, right? But he tried to explain the problem between machine and the human, and he said, in every single cell of our body, we have the full DNA of the full body. So every piece of ourselves knows everything about ourselves. But what the transistors know about the rest of the computer? Nothing.
And other computers, right? It's inherently very, very different setups. I'm. This has been so fascinating, but I want to ask this question, maybe as we kind of wrap up the conversation. In one sense, is if you were to pick something in fintech, right? And I'm becoming nerdy here, or being cliche.
Okay.
What would be that something you would want to be immortal in fintech?
To be?
What in fintech do you want to be immortal, right?
Immortal, if you
yeah, because the book is about immortality to a large extent, and I have battled with that question many times in my life and driven by that actually. So, but I would love to hear what you think could be the immortal fintech piece.
The truth is that to reconcile quantum gravity and space-time, we have to learn that the only eternal thing is the now, the present, because everything is entangled. What I would love to see is really a platform interplay that connects us all together in an easy way, in a way that we're not just striving for transactions. Of course, money has to be made, but we're striving to help people raising their financial consciousness in a way they can pull from the platform what they really need and open a discussion for what they might need to know more, right? And as a consequence, I reposition the incentives of the whole ecosystem in more sober and respectful ways, because banking is not an industry like any other industry. It's not just about making money, it's about serving society. That is what I would love to see.
Great.
Paolo, I have one more question that I'm sure everybody's interested in knowing, because you've written so many books and everybody must ask you, like, how do you balance your day? How do you end up churning this kind of output consistently? That it's fascinating how you're able to do this.
I don't know. I'm a curious mind, and I've been traveling a lot. I guess that I'm always jet lagged. I don't sleep on planes, so I have time, especially when you didn't have the Wi-Fi. The plane was like locking yourself, right, in the desert somewhere. So I started doing that, and so that's the way I was doing it. But I had this thing inside that I wanted to put down on paper. So it didn't happen chaotically or spontaneously. So every book was a deliberate choice to dive into one aspect in a way that I could, like a prism, have the multifaceted perspective about the same problem. And that's how I did that. And that really I wanted to know. And so that helps me to cut through the noise. There's a lot of noise, Monica, in the world, on social media. It's okay. Everybody wants to talk about pieces, but staying the course is important, though you need to know what it means, staying the course, right? So you need to have a clear view of the destination. So that helped me a lot.
Wow. I'm sure a lot of us will be inspired to actually stay the course on our side.
That's
I read a lot. I
perseverance. Yeah.
invite your audience to read Quantum Sapiens as well, right? It's all like circular. The more you read, the more you write, so on and so forth.
I do wish. I think a lot of my writing is now digital, as is Monica's, and getting that in terms of chapters is a special talent, and we really
I tell you,
really
in
respect.
terms of the measurement and the unmeasurable, this is also available on ebook, and I invite the ebook lovers to read it that way. But I do love this unmeasurable
Smell.
experience of smelling the glue of a
Yeah,
new
yeah.
book. That to me is gold.
It is, yeah. I have a whole library of books that I wish to read on, but I look forward to definitely getting the book here in Hong Kong, and I also hope to see you soon, either in Hong Kong or in one of your travels where you may not be jet lagged. So yeah, it's going to be fun.
Hopefully so. Thank you for this
Yeah.
conversation. I really appreciate the time and the space.
No, thank you. It's a fascinating conversation, and it also shows to the audience and a lot of us that quite sometimes people are so immersed in their professional world. And in our world, to be fair, it has been fairly exciting. There's been innovation and a lot of changes to keep us going and fascinated. But to find the time to, look at something connected but very different, very personal, yet which touches a lot of people is fascinating. So grazie mille, Paolo, for sharing your thoughts on our podcast.
Arrivederci e buona lettura.
That's it. Audience, stay tuned for more such fascinating conversation, whether that goes deep into your conscience or it allows and tickles your mind to learn more about innovation. This is the FinTech Decoded podcast. Do make sure to go to Paolo's book. We will put in the link for where you can find the book, either your audiobook or smelling the hard copy. And stay tuned for more. Follow us, click like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I'll probably take the opportunity now and also thank Monica for this. Is collectively we now are ranked number 9 as a YouTube podcast on payments and fintech by Favicon. So a very grand occasion for you to have Paolo here and hopefully push up a ranking further on that. Yeah.